Welcome to Thoughts on Thursday. It's Reverend Miller.
And I'm Stuart Holmes.
We're glad that you could join us as we kind of contemplate and talk about worship and our upcoming worship service this Sunday. We invite you to join us in person or also YouTube or Facebook. It is Reformation Sunday for us, and it's a wonderful time as we reflect on God's grace. We have been really talking about how the pandemic has changed worship and if those changes will stay. What will worship look like in the future? And part of that is we've been addressing technology, because technology does change how we do things, and it has always done that. And if you, about 50 or so years ago, if you were to look at a traditional Protestant church in the United States, they would probably have had an hour-long worship service. About 30 to 40 minutes dedicated to the sermon, because that's the most important thing. And you might maybe have 2 hymns, and the congregation would sing those hymns and they would stand up for that, but sit for the rest. And that was the big participation. You'd probably have a choir thing, choir solo. Technically, the prelude and postlude were not part of the worship. That was just to prepare you and then send you away. And that's what you would see. In other traditions, in the African American tradition, it would be much longer, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, and much more participation by the congregation. And also in the Pentecostal tradition, a longer service, much more participation by the congregation. With the change of technology, that has changed us. We have chosen to go for a shorter service, first because we were all virtual, and then second, when we were meeting in person, we didn't want everyone to stay too long. And if we were sitting the whole time, then more than an hour is a long time to sit. So that had all impacts. But if we're honest, technology, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Apple TV, Hulu, Netflix, all those technologies and those platforms have been pushing and changing worship. For instance, many people know about TED Talks. And so the TED curator, Chris Anderson, he explains a TED Talk is 18 minutes, and this is what he says. The 18 minutes long is enough to be serious and short enough to hold people's attention. It turns out that this length also works incredibly well online. It's the length of a coffee break, so you can watch a great talk and forward the link to other 2 or 3 people. It can go viral very easily. We didn't even know what viral was until recently. The 18-minute length also works much like the way Twitter forces people to be disciplined in what they write. By forcing speakers who are used to going on for 45 minutes to bring it down to 18. You get them to really think about what they want to say. What is the key point they want to communicate? It has a clarifying effect. It brings discipline. And so, our service, we're trying to go about 45 minutes. Sometimes it's 50 minutes. The length of the sermon might be shorter. I've never been the longest preacher in the world. And those are changes that we might see in the future. It's also interesting, I know you guys think about this stuff all the time, just like me. It's interesting, if you look at Apple TV or Netflix or Amazon Prime, and you look at their original content, TV series that they have made for their platform, they're different lengths. Each episode could be a different length. One could be 30 minutes, the next could be 40 minutes, could be 50 minutes, whatever time they need to tell that story that day. But if you're old like me, you were used to television. A sitcom was a half hour, a drama was an hour. Once in a while, to push the envelope, they would have a to be continued. So the next week, they would carry on that same story. But they had to do it that way because the next program came, right? Everything was because of commercials and because of, it just was streaming there. Where now people can pick and choose, and you can even binge a whole series in one day. And we might as well mention Ted Lasso. That's the big hot topic. It's interesting, they have decided really to help tell their stories that they didn't dump all the episodes down. Each week you get one episode. So if you're watching it currently, you can't just binge it. And in fact, that would tell the story differently, right? And so as we look at this stuff, we're really not giving you guys answers. You're probably already realizing that. Because it's unknown. What will the future look like? And technology is changing and transforming us in that way. And one last quote, lots of quotes. And this is a book, Touching the Altar, about the Old Testament for Christian worship and kind of the principles of our worship. And a professor of mine, a former professor of mine, Thomas Bogart, when he was talking about worship, and he sees that in the Old Testament, worship was about drama and telling the story. And he says this, the people of Israel knew no division between sacred and secular. They believed that the glory of God filled the world, and that everything in the world told of this glory. The comings and goings of ordinary life held glory. The narrative lifted the veil of the ordinary and let it shine. And so we often think, in our terms, there's secular and sacred, right? And really, all of this world can tell the glory of God. And so sometimes we make history sacred. And we think that time that we like so much is a sacred thing. But really, sacred and secular does change over time. And this is my very long introduction to Stuart, because at one point in time, the organ was really a secular instrument. And we see it as a sacred instrument. You would have seen the organ in movie theaters. You would have seen the organ in baseball parks. I mean, because it was the latest technology. Why would you have such a king of instruments, right? You see that less in those places and only see it mostly in churches now. And so now we get this idea that it's really a sacred instrument. But that changes over time. And just like different elements of our worship might seem more sacred or secular, as we look at this technology, I think it can be a way of telling God's story in a new and fresh way that is a sacred and wonderful thing. Oh, I wrapped that up.
Wow, because what I was going to say has now been all changed.
Oh, my
even though
goodness.
we did kind of talk to each other.
I talked, he didn't listen apparently the first time.
Well, you talk about the changes. The organ, actually, when it first started out, it was in the people that could afford it, the church, the kings, and in the French Romantic era, the organ became an instrument that would highlight parts of the Mass, especially in France. And that's where the art of improvisation came in. If a plain chant was singing, then the organist, after that portion of the service, would take that and go for 5 or 10 minutes on improvising.
You can't do 5 or 10 anymore.
No.
I just said the length is shortening.
It's out the window. Interestingly enough, while the organ did have its place in the movie theaters back before talkies came in, it kind of morphed into the church setting and some concert halls. It fell out of favor. Now we find it back in the concert halls. So they're discovering that if the instrument is created properly, it can become yet another instrument for the orchestra. That's not what I was going to talk about today.
You just want to speak longer than me. That's what
No, I'm going to speed it up, right? The music this Sunday, of course, being Reformation Sunday, is based on A Mighty Fortress, Ein Feste Burg. The piece that I started out with was written by Dietrich Buxtehude, who was a German composer in the Baroque era. He was a model for, or a mentor for Handel and others, including Bach, who walked 400 kilometers from Arnstadt, Germany to Lübeck, where Buxtehude was holding a post as organist. Very famous in that he was really the father of what was to become part of Bach's legacy. The postlude, did I say the Buxtehude is the prelude? The postlude is by a American composer who is still with us and writes some magnificent pieces. His variation on A Mighty Fortress is wonderful. And I'm going to close out today's Rob and Stuart talk
with
that piece, just because it offers such a contrast, and it's one of those pieces that just picked me up and I said, oh, I love this piece. And so hopefully it'll come across the same way to the audience. One more point. You talk about length. That's always been a concern of organists. What is the postlude and what is the prelude supposed to be? And it is my opinion, our opinion, I guess, that it does set some of the tone for the service. But the old routine was that you had to start the service with beautiful, melodic, prayerful music. And that has, of course, changed to the point where we try our best to pick out some sort of theme, either in the text of the Sunday, the liturgy of the Sunday, or the music that is going to be provided. So that, again, has changed with time.
And it'll probably go back, right? That's what Ecclesiastes tells us.
Who talked longer?
Well, all I have to say is Stuart goes on a trip to Europe and he comes back and he's talking in kilometers. We're in the United States here. It's miles.
Yeah. So miles would be.
So you'll have to Google the 400 kilometers and see how many.
300 something. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. We hope to see you either on YouTube and Facebook or in person for Reformation Sunday this coming Sunday, October 31st.
Ein Festberg.